Well, welcome back. I'm Rick K. Jones, and this is United Taste of America from iHeart Podcast. As part of the big 250th celebration of America, our birthday this year, we are visiting each of the 50 states and telling their culinary history. Today, we're in the last of the original 13 colonies, the smallest state in the Union, but it's a wonderful, beautiful coastal state. That is Rhode Island. Rhode Island really starts with a man by the name of Roger Williams. Roger Williams was a Puritan minister from England. He had come to Massachusetts and was part of the famous Massachusetts Bay Colony. But he was a little more progressive than some of those early Puritans. And so they excommunicated him because he was advocating for even more religious freedom. And so they kicked him out of the Bay Colony, and that's okay. He just moved a little further south, and he bought land from the Narragansett Indians. And he started what was called the Providence Plantation, which is now modern-day Providence, Rhode Island. He started that in 1636. In 1638, he started what? The Baptist Church. And so he started the Baptist to be a little bit more progressive than the other religions that were the Pilgrim and Puritan religions. Listen, he was really ahead of his time. He really wanted to have good relations with the Native Americans, and he was for freedom of religion and separation of state. So early on, now remember, so many of the colonies were settled by religious groups because they had been persecuted. Well, what did they do? They turned around and persecuted other people. They'd been persecuted. No, you got to believe the way I believe. You got to do what I do. He was like, no. That's not why we're here. We want religious freedom, and we want separation from our government with the church that was not happening at the time in Massachusetts. Rhode Island was pretty much, as a state, controlled by the British throughout the Revolutionary War. But once the French came in, remember we talked about the French in New York after the Battle of Saratoga, the French came in, the French really occupied Rhode Island. And that was kind of their base of operation during the war when they came to our aid. Rhode Island, as you know, was the last of the 13 colonies to actually become a state. Here's something interesting. In 1652, they were the earliest colony to do what? Ban slavery. They banned slavery in 1652. Didn't last very long. Didn't last. In fact, Rhode Island was heavily involved with the slave trade, financed the slave trade in many cases. Now, how did the slave trade work? Well, we have these plantations in the Caribbean, and they're growing what? Sugarcane. And they're making from what? From sugarcane, molasses. And they're taking that molasses and making what? Rum. Okay? And then they're taking that rum and they're going back across to Europe to sell the rum to do what? Buy more slaves, get more slaves. And so it was really that combination. But somebody has to finance all this. I read a really interesting book not too long ago about how so much of the slave trade was financed by French wine growers in the Bordeaux region. Again, they're growing Bordeaux grapes. They were looking for more places for the grapes to be, the wine to be sold. They made profits, and they used the profits to buy slaves. And so Rhode Island, while they banned slavery, they were financing slavery in a lot of ways. The first textile mill, we've talked a lot about the textile mills coming from England to New England. Well, the first textile mill in North Carolina was in 1790 in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. Rhode Island really became a major industrial state, and that led to a lot of mass immigration from Ireland and Portugal primarily. And as we talk about the culinary history a little bit later of Rhode Island, it reflects both the Irish and the Portuguese that came. You may know, again, Rhode Island is a beautiful coastal state with huge cliffs and just spectacular scenery. In the Gilded Age, the robber barons, the people that had made all the money, they created these summer cottages in Newport. If you've been to a cottage, it has 100 rooms. These are gigantic mansions, they called cottages, in Newport, where the rich robber barons lived. And it's, you can tour Newport in that area and still see how they lived. The rest of us don't quite live that way. But it was some beautiful homes that are still there in the Newport area. And today, Rhode Island remains, pretty much an industrial state. It's a good tourism state. It's a state with really high taxes, though. So if you want to pay a lot of taxes, you can move to Rhode Island. Our playlist today has 5 songs about Rhode Island. One of them is the Eagles' very famous song, "The Last Resort," which is all about Rhode Island. Timmy May recorded a song called "Little Rhodey." Nancy Lamott has a song called "Rhode Island is Famous for You." Then there was a band leader named Guy Lombardo. Y'all may know him. He plays Old Lang Syne every year when we celebrate New Year's Eve. He wrote and recorded a song called "Poor Little Rhode Island." And then one of my favorite singers of all time, an R&B singer, was a guy named Jeffrey Osborne. He originally was in a band called LTD, and I've got a classic from Jeffrey Osborne and LTD called "Back in Love Again." Back in Love Again, from the great state of Rhode Island. So let's talk about the culinary dishes of Rhode Island. Again, for some crazy reason, this is a hot dog state. There are hot dog stands and hot dog shops all over Rhode Island, and they call them hot wieners. And the hot wieners are made with mustard, chili, onions, and celery salt. That's the Rhode Island way. Mustard, chili, onions, celery salt, hot wieners. They're famous for their Johnny cakes. Johnny cakes are cornmeal pancakes that can either be savory, you can eat them almost like cornbread, savory dish, or they can be sweet because you pour maple syrup on them. They're famous for their pizza strips. In Rhode Island, they do square pizzas, and they cut them into thin strips, and you eat them strips. You know the old joke about pizza where you get a pizza and you say, "Oh, please cut it into 4 pieces, not 8. I couldn't possibly eat 8. So I'll just eat 4 big pieces instead of 8 small pieces." They have donuts, big-time donut shops throughout Rhode Island, and they call them doughboys. And they're a different kind of donut, and they're flat. They're not puffy and round. They're flat, and they've got sugar, powdered sugar on top of them. They're really, really good. There's a very famous frozen lemonade drink called Dell's. And they also have something they call coffee milk, which is really a whole lot of milk with a little bit of coffee. When I was a kid, my mama let me drink coffee. Not really. She poured a little bit of coffee in the saucer of the coffee cup, and then poured a whole lot of milk, and I drank coffee milk, and they have that in Rhode Island. Very, very famous there. We talked about the Irish. Corned beef and cabbage is huge throughout Rhode Island because of the influence of the Irish that came there. And there are so many Portuguese restaurants, and Emeril Lagasse, for example, is from Rhode Island, and that Portuguese community. One of the best dishes they have there is because of the Italians, is a lobster ravioli. That's really, really good. Again, it's a coastal state, lots of great seafood, lots of calamari, a lot of squid caught off the coast of Rhode Island, lightly battered, and then they add hot cherry peppers, garlic, and some kind of a marinara sauce. Fried calamari in Rhode Island is different and very, very special. They cook clams everywhere you can cook them. They get lots and lots of different kinds of clams, soft clams that they fry like they do in Massachusetts, clam chowders. They have 3 kinds of chowder in Rhode Island. The first one is a clear broth chowder. It's just chowder, juice, and bacon or fatback, and potatoes and celery, sometimes carrots. They do a New England style, and they do a Manhattan style. And I've even been there at some point where they do a combination where they have a pink sauce, which has got the tomatoes added to the New England clam chowder. So I guess it's really four kinds of clam chowder in Rhode Island. They have a great dish called a stuffy. It's a large chopped quahog clam, which they stuff it with breadcrumbs, herbs, peppers, and what they call chorico sausage, which is this Portuguese version of what we call chorizo, which is a Spanish version of sausage. They do a Spanish version of it there called fado sausages. If you know anything about Portuguese culture, fado is a kind of music that's a lament. It's like, I would call it the Portuguese version of the blues. And they make these fado sausages that have garlic and paprika in them. They're freaking ridiculously good. Again, fried clams, steamed clams. But in Rhode Island, they are uniquely known for their clam cakes, which is really a clam donut. It's a fried dough full of chopped clams. And for my money, the best clam cakes anywhere can be found at Narragansett Point at the historic Aunt Carrie's restaurant. Like so many places that I've discovered, I first discovered Aunt Carrie's from the book Road Food. Road Food, I'm in New England, I'm opening Road Food, and I find this place called Aunt Carrie's. It is a very great story because, yes, there really was an Aunt Carrie. Carrie Cooper and her husband Ulysses lived in Connecticut, but they enjoyed riding over the state line into Rhode Island and swimming and picnicking and doing things at Narragansett Point. This is in the 1920s. They're driving a Model T. They come to fish, to swim, to camp out on the beach. And Ulysses said at one point, man, there's no place to get anything to eat or drink over here. And this was a place called Point Judith. And it's mostly, we got thirsty, so what did? They started selling lemonade. They had a lemonade stand, cold lemonade to local fishermen and the nearby campers. Now, Carrie was brought up on a farm, so she could pretty much cook anything. And so the children started digging up the clams and bringing them to her, to their mom, and she would make clam chowder. And so pretty soon they started selling clam chowder along with the lemonades. And she wanted something to kind of sop up the clams, and so she made an original corn fritter from cornmeal that became ultimately her clam cake recipe. And of course, the smell would travel. She's cooking chowder and cooking these fried clam cakes, and other campers and other fishermen were coming up to her, and they'd say what she's making. And of course, you know, once she started making them, she had to keep making them because somebody would eat them and they would want more. And so her husband said, let's start selling these clam cakes in our chowder with our lemonade. And that small stand was built down where is now the lighthouse at Point Judith, very famous lighthouse in Rhode Island, Point Judith. And that's where the original stand was. But he bought some land where the restaurant's located now, right at Narragansett Point. Beautiful piece of property. It's always, the best places are always on great real estate. And he built this restaurant in 1920. So in 2020, they had their 100th anniversary. And they were kind enough when Ryan and I were there to give us hoodies. So I have a very famous Aunt Carrie's hoodie. That's a picture back here of the restaurant itself and talks a little bit about the history on the hoodie. So I'll wear it with pride. Aunt Carrie's hoodie from 1920. It is a really, really wonderful place to eat. Well, now, How did Aunt Carrie get its name? Well, they always had cousins, nieces and nephews, and someone was always yelling, Aunt Carrie, Aunt Carrie, Aunt Carrie. And so that's how it became known as Aunt Carrie's. Over the years, many of Carrie's relatives have actually worked there. The white-haired lady most people thought was Aunt Carrie was actually her daughter, Gertrude. Again, Aunt Carrie was in the 20s and 30s. Gertrude's in the 40s, 50s, and 60s and 70s. Gertrude married a man named William Foy, and he had worked at the restaurant when his family camped there in the summer. So, classic summer romance. I work at the restaurant, I meet the girl, I come back and marry the girl, and now I'm running the restaurant with her. Gertrude and William took over the restaurant in 1953 when Ulysses died, and Aunt Carrie finally retired. Today, Elsie Foy, their daughter, runs the restaurant with her two daughters. So we've got Aunt Carrie's fourth generation running the restaurant. They got a wonderful staff there. If you're around early in the morning, they start baking their fresh homemade apple pies and making their homemade raisin bread. Homemade raisin bread, apple pies, you smell that. That's a good way to start your day. And then end your day with great seafood, including those wonderful clam cakes. Again, over 100 years old. 100 years old. It's Aunt Carrie's in Narragansett. So where else should you eat in Rhode Island? Here are, again, three from me. And again, I always recommend places where I've actually eaten. Okay, so there are other restaurants, I'm sure, that are great in Rhode Island. And I haven't spent as much time in some of the other towns, but I have spent a lot of time in Providence, Rhode Island. Providence is a great basketball town, Providence College, and some other schools that are there that are really cool. They have a Johnson and Wales University there. And Brown University, one of the Ivy League schools, is based there in Providence, along with Providence College. So I'm going to give you three restaurants from Providence that I absolutely love. The first one is a place called Al Forno. It's the pizza place, and they do it differently. They grill their pizzas. They do them on charcoal grills. And so you're getting that crusty, wonderful dough that chars up from grills. They got all kinds of pizzas. Y'all, trust me, Al Forno's wonderful pizza. Obviously, it's a college town, so you got lots of students eating lots of pizza, drinking lots of beer, and this is the place to do it. There's a classic Italian place since 1914 called Camille's. Yep, it's your classic, what we call Southern Italian, checkered tablecloth, red sauce, homemade pastas, great fish dishes, great veal dishes, Camille's since 1914. And then we talked about the great Portuguese influence. There's a place called Odini's, Odinis. It's in East Providence, and it's all Portuguese food. Portuguese food's famous for what? Clam dishes, many cases clam and pork combo dishes, lots of salt cod. The Portuguese basically invented salt cod. Why is that? They were fishermen in the banks. They caught the cod. They had to preserve the cod to get it back to Europe. They salted it. Salt cod is salted fish that you soak either in water or in milk to do what? Remove the salt. But it still has a little bit of a salty flavor. And they do cod fritters and cod cakes and all kinds of cod dishes. And they make those wonderful fado and other Portuguese sausages at Odini's. Three wonderful places to eat in Providence. So that, my friends, is Rhode Island. It's the small state with amazing food. It's a melting pot food with contributions from all of these various immigrants that came to Rhode Island. It's a wonderful and a great culinary state, the great state of Rhode Island. We'll see you back here next week from the first state after the original 13 colonies, our 14th state in the Union. That is the state of Vermont.